Welcome, everybody, to the Old Time Boxing Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. The Old Time Boxing Show is brought to you by MyBookie.ag. You can go to thegruelingtruth.net, find the MyBookie.ag banner, click on it. It'll take you right there. If you want to bet on the Rigondeaux-Lomachenko fight, or you want to bet on the college bowls or the NFL, you can go there. MyBookie will take care of you. They pay within 48 hours. I'm your host for the Old Time Boxing Show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I want to welcome in our resident boxing historian, Christopher Shelton. How you doing, Christopher?
Good, Mike. Glad to. A lot of fun. Schmeling Lewis. What a match.
Yeah, and I think these were the biggest fights in history, basically, just because of the political circumstances that surrounded it. Schmeling won the first match by a knockout in round 12, but in the second match, Lewis won through a first-round knockout, a little bit over more than 2 minutes. Although the two champions met to create a pugilistic spectacle remarkable on its own terms, the two fights came to embody the broader political and social conflict of the times. As the most significant African-American athlete of his time, and he was following Jack Johnson, he was 20, 25 years after Jack Johnson. Lewis was really a focal point for African-American pride in the 1930s. Moreover, as a contest between representatives of the United States and Nazi Germany during the 1930s, the fight came to symbolize the struggle between democracy and fascism. Lewis's performance in the bouts made him one of the first true African-American national heroes in the United States, Chris. And I just think with everything that came together to make that fight, especially the second fight, I don't think any fight compares to this fight in importance in the history of boxing.
Yeah, it's certainly that's really what stays significant. There's actually a couple things that are significant, but what you're talking about, the sociological stuff, the political stuff, that somehow it's a boxing bout, and a boxing bout, the second one, somehow turned into the Nazis versus the Allies, and it's amazing to sort of have Hitler somehow involved in this fight. Hitler versus America, even though it's sad. Schmeling had to have that on his shoulders, but it did take on something that it became beyond a normal boxing bout, and I guess that's why it was so powerful at the time, and then we'll get into it probably later. But then the friendship that developed later, the emotional stuff between them, that also gave it something that gives it a spark. Umpteen decades later.
Yeah, and we're going to start off looking at Max Schmeling, who I think is one of the most underrated heavyweights of all time. Started his career in 1924 in Germany. Pretty much won every title in Europe: the EBU light heavyweight title, the Germany light heavyweight title. Comes to America, to New York in 1928, and his first fight, Madison Square Garden, beats Joe Monte. I think he really came into the U.S. conscience with a TKO victory over Johnny Risco and Paulino Yuskundin. I suck at saying these names from the foreigners, but everybody knows who I'm talking about if you're listening to the show. So I think when you look at it, him coming to the United States, and back then it wasn't like now. It wasn't like he was celebrated. He comes over on a boat by himself with his manager and basically has to make his own way in New York.
Yeah, at least he does have backers, because he had a lot of fame in Germany itself, and then there were German backers to see if he could make it in America, because even though the European crown, titles, it is what it is. It's really when you have the American titles that you are sort of viewed as almost the world champion and stuff, whether that's fair or unfair. So yes, in the 20s, the light heavyweight as a champion in Germany. The heavyweight champions would have revolved around Jack Dempsey through 1927, and then Gene Tunney beat him twice and took over the title, and Gene Tunney fought once and then retired, and then it was left vacant, and the two people that were given the opportunity was Max Schmeling, and there was, because of reputation and such, and then Jack Sharkey, because Sharkey had fought Dempsey in an eliminator bout, and quite frankly, Sharkey was dominating Dempsey, and Dempsey had lost once to Tunney, lost his title, and whoever won got to fight Gene Tunney, and everyone wanted Dempsey to win, and Dempsey landed a low blow, a really hard low blow, and and Sharkey was in pain. And then Sharkey turned to the referee, like, "Are you going to do something?" When he turned to the referee, Dempsey clobbered him and knocked him out. Everyone was thrilled by that, but at the same time, people thought, maybe that Sharkey deserved better fate than that. So it helped launch him as the other person to fight for the title.
Yeah, and you talk about the first Sharkey fight. I think Schmeling was a little green at the time. He'd only fought Risco and Usgandun, who were guys that were really well known. And it seemed to me like Sharkey was winning the fight through 3 rounds. Then in the 4th round, Sharkey gets hit with a Schmeling gets hit with a low blow, goes down. Actually, on the film, it looks like he can get up. And in everything I read, his trainer was over there telling him to stay down, and he ended up staying down. They ended up winning the title that way.
It was definitely controversial, and I got to admit, it's impossible for us to know what's going on in his head. And yes, people, there were always in bare knuckle there was something to that, where people, and in boxing too, where somebody would intentionally try to get disqualified and win by disqualification. Sharkey did hit him low. Whether he could get up or not is a little unclear. He's in pain. Of course, now we have the 5-minute rule. You'll give somebody 5 minutes, but they didn't have that then. And Schmeling claimed he couldn't get up, and so the referee had to make a decision and made a decision of the disqualification. It was an unpopular way for Schmeling to win the title. And then I'll just throw this out. And then as a titleist, he fought a guy named Young Stribling, which is kind of an interesting guy because he fought over 220 times and had over 120 knockouts. So scored a knockout against him before they finally got the demanded rematch between Sharkey and Schmeling again.
Well, see, and actually, the one thing I did find from all the reading I've done over the years was Young Stribling was actually a slight betting favorite going into that fight, and then right before the fight started, the odds shifted in favor of Schmeling.
Oh, I didn't realize that the gambling changes and stuff. I watched the fight itself. It lasted 15 rounds before Schmeling knocked him out, and it was a good Schmeling fight. It was nice to see after disqualification, and I just like this guy. After working so hard to get his shot, that he did get it, and he proved himself to be worthy. But it was a fine Schmeling performance, and ended in a knockout.
Yeah, and it was the only knockout loss Stribling suffered in a career that consisted of more than 280 professional bouts. And the fight in 1931 was named the Ring Magazine Fight of the Year. So definitely a good victory for Schmeling. Then you get the rematch against Sharkey. And I know just from rewatching this fight, there's like a 30-minute video with most of the fight footage on YouTube. This is a fight that even though Sharkey won, Schmeling, I think, dominated the fight.
Oh, I agree. I think Schmeling completely dominated. If you watch that coverage, the announcer thinks that Schmeling pitched a shutout. I don't know if he pitched a shutout, but he completely dominated it. And usually, if somebody's going to take the title away from somebody else, they have to prove something. And Sharkey really doesn't do anything against Schmeling. But you never know with the crowd, and it's boxing, and boxing always has weirdness. So Schmeling's a person who it was a little unclear how he won the title, whether it was fair, went on disqualification, and then when he lost the title, it was sort of taken away from him because he never became champion again, a heavyweight champion. So it's kind of an unfair way for it to be taken away from him. And Jack Sharkey was the champion now, but not really regarded as one of the great, not one of the people you put in the top 10 or anything like that.
No, maybe if you're doing the top 10 worst, maybe.
Yeah, something along those lines.
All right,
Braddock can join him. No, I'm just kidding.
So after the loss, Schmeling comes back. He beats Mickey Walker, but then he loses to Max Baer, Steve Hamas, draws with Usgandun, who he fought before, comes back, beats Hamas, and then fights Usgandun again, beats him. He's going to get a shot at Joe Louis. The thing I want to talk about with Max Schmeling, and you alluded to it before, was about Schmeling was perceived as being a Nazi. What's your take on the perception of Schmeling as a Nazi?
Well, I think it's just one of those things that sort of, caves in on you because when he initially was the champion and stuff, he was Franklin Roosevelt really liked Schmeling. Franklin Roosevelt spoke German, so he actually interacted with Schmeling, and Schmeling was popular in America until the rise of Nazism and Hitler. And Schmeling, to his credit, the one thing he was smart never to do was to join the Nazi Party, because there's people in his period that were Americans who joined the Communist Party that, for ideological reasons, and it burned them years later.
But wait a second. One thing I do know from all the research I've done over the years on Schmeling is this.
Yeah.
He was willing to join the Nazi Party. Hitler didn't want him to, because Hitler thought it would make him too apolitical when he came to the States to fight.
Well, that's possible. It's possible and not necessary. I have heard this back and forth stuff, and I guess that's the stuff we hear is sort of controversy and stuff. And they did have sort of certain pictures where it looked like his arm was out, like in a Nazi salute, or another picture where there's a Nazi flag behind him. All we know is he didn't actually join, but you're right. I have heard that there was concern if he actually joined the party itself, that he wouldn't be welcome in America at all, and that they were using him as an ambassador of goodwill, at least in the early configuration of Hitler, as, hey, he's a nice guy just trying to improve Germany and the economy.
Yeah, but my other concern is this. You had like Marlene Dietrich, the actress, who actually left Germany. You had a few filmmakers, a few artists that also left because they wanted to warn the people in the United States what was going on in Germany. And Max Schmeling, after he won the heavyweight title, lost it, goes back to Germany, and basically he was a Nazi just because he wouldn't come out against them. He was a guy that was in love with people that had some power. And he had a bunch of Jewish friends that were picked off one by one that he used to hang out and party with in the 1920s, and he didn't do a damn thing about it.
Well, that I'm not sure about, because actually there are people, at least I watched various documentaries, and they were of Jewish background who came to America and had to immigrate because of the situation, and they did say that they thought that Max Schmeling had helped them either hide him in his place or help get them to America, or he could get to Hitler personally and say, leave this person alone, and that he had to do it in a sort of a subtle way. But that
my problem there is this. He helps his friends, but there's millions of other Jews that died. And I'm guessing that he knew what was going on because he was not a stupid man.
Oh, he knew it was going on. That's why he had to help these people, because he knew what was happening to Jewish people.
But he didn't help them. He could have came over here and told everybody what was going on. But he was too afraid to, because he didn't want to give up what he had in Germany.
Well, that I don't know. Like I said, it's hard to read somebody's mind. The only thing I can say is that I believe, because the Jewish groups, rightfully will always hunt Nazis, and if Schmeling had shown more propensity for being a Nazi, he would be hunted and hunted and hunted. But it seems that he was caught in a really bad situation, and what he tried to do was just sort of work the underground. You're right; the only people he could help are the people he personally knew. But I believe that if he was a secret Nazi, that he'd never be forgiven. He'd be hounded till he died.
I never brought up. I specifically said that he wasn't in the Nazi Party. What I'm saying is this. I think it's just as bad to be the one doing the killing as it is to be the one that sits by and lets it happen, especially when you're getting rich off of it and you're being taken care of. That's my problem with it. And the Max Schmeling thing, he did a lot of things to help Joe Louis. He was a very intelligent man. He was a great guy. Did a lot of great things after he was out of boxing. Was a great businessman. But in the end, I would think even when he's 90 years old, sitting at home by himself, that maybe he wishes he would have done something to make a bigger difference instead of just worrying about his own career and his own friends.
That could be. Every person has their own conscience and stuff like that. I can't say what I would do under a circumstance like that, because I've never had anything in my lifetime that was so, where I had to leave the country or seeing a group of people just slaughtered within my country and had to make a decision whether to leave or not. So I can't say what he could have or should have done, other than it. Like I said, there are Jewish business people that came to America and said he did various things to try to help. Could he have done more? Should he have done more? That I can't tell you. I think he was trying to do something, and over nothing, and a lot of people were powerless to do anything. And I guess you're right. He could have maybe come to America and just lived here and started speaking anti-Hitler stuff, and as early as 33, 34. But I don't know what it's like to leave your homeland or what you have to do. So I'm not disagreeing with you. All I know is that it appears he did what he could in his own way, and maybe he could have done more. That is for history to judge, absolutely.
Well, I think it's pretty easy to judge when you find out what was happening there. And really, in the early 30s, the narrative in the United States was Hitler was a guy that was trying to do things to help people. And if you would have had people coming over here, which you did, like we said before, the actress Marlene Dietrich, I think maybe it could have made a difference. Maybe he could have been screaming. I mean, you had a Nazi American party back in the 30s that they would hold rallies at Madison Square Garden that would have 20,000 people waving Nazi signs.
Yeah, well, the only thing is that he never really set propaganda. Like Charles Lindbergh was an American, and Charles Lindbergh was saying, hey, that Germany is, superior to America militarily, and they're not. This is, it's a good system and stuff like that. Lindbergh was having public pro feelings toward the Nazi Party, and Schmeling never released statements that ever promoted Nazism, though he was being used by the Nazi Party to promote, just by being a champion, just by sort of being a goodwill ambassador. So he was being used, and he didn't stop being used. And I guess you're right in that sense. Even if he didn't want to speak out against it, he knew he was being used to promote the Nazi Party in its own way, and maybe he should have done more to distance himself or find. I agree in that sense.
Yeah, and I just think doing nothing. It's just as bad as doing bad stuff when you're letting bad things happen. And like I said, the other thing is this: we had George Bush's grandfather, who was a U.S. Senator, Prescott Bush, who was actually a director in shareholder companies that profited from their involvement with the financial backers of Nazi Germany.
Oh yeah, Joe Kennedy made money from Nazism too and such. I forgot what I was going to say. I was going to say something. No, go ahead. I don't remember what I was going to say.
All right, so we'll go ahead. We'll move to Joe Louis. We've gotten Schmeling up to his fight there. Louis was born, I think, a sharecropper's son down south. They moved to Detroit, Michigan. Everything I saw interview-wise was before he became the champion. Talked slow, lacked some self-confidence. But Joe Louis ended up being the antithesis, at least the way he was portrayed by the media. He was the anti-Jack Johnson. Yeah,
and that's exactly what like I said, Jack Johnson. There could have been a black heavyweight champion before Joe Louis's time. I mean, even in Jack Johnson's time, before Jack Johnson. But there had to be a certain kind of African American or a black fighter from another region. But it is someone that's not causing problems, not controversial. And Joe Louis was not a controversial person. And then his fighting style turned out to be very good for sports, and that wasn't even necessarily pre-planned because he never went in looking like when he fought white boxers like he had any kind of emotional anything. He was just a guy doing his job. And I think the sort of detached way that he approached his job made it easier for people to accept him personally, and then his style was popular because he was the first really popular champion since Jack Dempsey, or at least Gene Tunney, who followed him, because Schmeling and Lewis and Dare didn't quite reach the public imagination that Joe Louis seemed to bring to the table.
Yeah, and if you look at Lewis's career, he started off when his first 13 or 14 fights, all within about a 13, 14-month time span. Probably his first real bout of significance was Primo Carnera, which, if you've watched the film, was pretty much a complete and utter. It looks like a professional against a guy that's coming out of a bar.
Well, a giant guy coming out of a barn.
Yeah.
It was at the end of Primo Carnera's career, though I'm never sure he was ever a great heavyweights, like huge heavyweights, like 6'6", 250 to 260 pounds, a huge guy. And he knocked out Sharkey, and that's what Primo Carnero was in the middle of those other names I mentioned as a heavyweight champion. And Joe Louis, dispensed of him, and it was at least a big name and a former champion, so it was a high-profile victory, knockout.
Yeah, and that was also the first fight where Lewis's promoter became Mike Jacobs, I believe. And you want to talk a little bit about Mike Jacobs?
I don't know what to say other than he helped promote Lewis, sort of the who he would fight, but also the attitude he had to have, sort of like maybe Branch Rickey a little bit with Jackie Robinson. This is how you should act. This is what you should do, so that you don't become unpopular with the white people of America, and kept him sort of on a straight course. And then, obviously gave the tips and training and stuff like that to stay dedicated. And Lewis apparently lost his focus a little bit when he did fight Schmeling. But before then, he was a very focused guy on every fighter, and that you could come out of this, bad background and earn some money, or at least, have a real life. So he was the strategist, and how an African American could come from a bad background and be something.
All right. What I know about Mike Jacobs is this. I believe he got his start in boxing scalping Terry McGovern tickets in the early 1900s. He would buy tickets directly from patrons, exit the ticket office for more than they paid, and then he would resell them at inflated prices. And I know that his big kick into the boxing world was he was the advisor and the money man for promoter Tex Rickard for the 1919 Jess Willard-Jack Dempsey fight. I think I read that Rickard had met him in like 1906 when Jacobs was selling tickets to the Battling Nelson-Joe Gans fight. I think he ended up from 37 to 49. He staged like 320 shows at Madison Square Garden. And his promotional company was also the 20th Century, what was it called? The 20th Century Sporting Club, which, you see when you watch the old Lewis fights, you see the 20th Century Sporting Club on there. That's hard to say, by the way. And he was inducted into the World Boxing Hall of Fame. I don't remember when, but I know he was inducted into the World Boxing Hall of Fame. But we get Lewis. He gets the fight against Carnera, and then he really puts himself on the map over the next few months. He knocks out King Levinsky. He knocks out Max Baer. Usgenden gets beat again by a TKO by him. So when he's going into the Schmeling fight, I think the way people look at this is that similar to what we saw with Tyson Holyfield. If we want to do a comparison from a show a couple weeks ago, where right. I think people thought Schmeling was on the way down, Lewis was on the way up, and this fight was going to be a one-sided ass whipping.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, of those fights he had, the Max Baer was pretty high profile, and Baer, a hard puncher and such. You and I both thought he got a little bit of a raw deal in Cinderella Man and stuff.
He got a big raw deal. Big role.
Yeah, we both sort of agree on that. But yes, going into the fight, I think Schmeling had lost like 3 or 4 of his last 7. So and he'd been fighting quite a while. He'd been fighting 10 years longer than Lewis, and so it looked like it was on the way down. And so I guess that's the reason why Lewis, who'd been training so hard, and knew he was probably going to get a title shot, and just felt that. This time he didn't have to fight as hard. His son would talk about it. His son said Lewis liked to golf, and he felt that he didn't want to interrupt his golfing game to fight Schmeling because he didn't have to. That this guy was just going to be, another guy like Baer or Carnera who stays maybe behind them a little bit, and it wouldn't be that tough of a foe. And I guess it's always one of those things because then Schmeling. They don't expect it. Schmeling's taking this very, very serious, so he's really working his tail off for months on end just for this fight. So you have one guy who's very experienced, who's really, really training hard for this one bout, and then another guy not as experienced who thinks this is kind of an easy foe, and that can always be dangerous in boxing. When always you do these things of who will beat who, like especially do it from different periods. You have to say, well, it depends what person you're facing. Which Jack Dempsey are you facing? Which Muhammad Ali are you facing? Which Joe Frazier are you facing? You're facing the guy that's really dedicated to training, or a guy who's not quite in the same mental state. And Joe Louis was in the right mental state. He's in good physical shape, but he wasn't in the right mental state to face Schmeling, who was both in the right mental state and in terrific physical shape.
Yeah, and when you bring up the political aspects of the first fight, it was nothing like the second fight. In Germany, actually, Hitler instructed the sports writers to kind of bury this in the back of the newspaper. He didn't think that Schmeling had much of a chance either. And to promote the fight, since people were freaked out by the Nazi Party, the anti-Jewish ideology, Schmeling had a Jewish manager by the name of Joe Jacobs, who, no relation to Mike Jacobs either, by the way, but set up Schmeling training at a Jewish resort in the Catskills, hoping it would help basically mollify Jewish fight fans. And the fight between Louis and Schmeling, the first one took place June the 18th, 1936 at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, New York. The referee was the legendary Arthur Donovan. Now, everybody's heard, and I've seen the interview with Schmeling where he tells everybody that he sees something. He's not going to tell them what it is. But I've seen a couple different stories. One that Schmeling's manager came up with the plan, or Schmeling did from watching all this film. The other story I heard, which I don't know if it's true or not, was that Jack Johnson actually went and helped Schmeling.
Well, I never heard about Jack Johnson helping Schmeling. Schmeling did say coyly that he saw a weakness in Louis, and obviously, he did. I will say the first three rounds and such are even, but it appears that Louis was vulnerable after he threw a left, that he tried to drop his guard just a tiny bit and left himself open for an overhand right, and that he was very open to it, and Schmeling nailed him in the fourth and knocked him down and stunned him so hard beyond that Louis says he doesn't even remember the rest of the fight after the fourth round. And so he clearly was vulnerable to it, because he got knocked down other times in his career, and a lot of times the punches that really would get him was that overhand right. He would eventually have sparring partners who would just try to fight and, trick him with overhand rights so he'd prepare for it a little bit better. But he was always a little vulnerable with it. But he was very vulnerable with Schmeling because he wasn't expecting somebody whose entire plot was to set up for that.
All right, and Louis suffered various injuries during the fight, including one to his eye. But he kept fighting. He just wasn't as good as Schmeling that night. Schmeling, put it like this, is when I watched Frazier Ali won, you look at that Frazier, he's one of the greatest heavyweights that ever lived. I think that Schmeling on this one night in particular was as good as almost anybody ever.
Yeah, and again, he was just very prepared for this particular opponent, and the opponent was a little bit mentally too relaxed and wasn't quite ready for what was happening to him, and he had a plan. And then once Louis says he doesn't remember anything after the fourth round, then it's kind of interesting to watch the fifth through eighth rounds, because Louis is doing pretty well at that point, kind of coming back, and then Schmeling takes the ninth round and starts really nailing him. And then Schmeling said, and you can see it by the 10th round, he's in control of this thing before the 12th round, where he starts battering Louis around and knocks him out.
Yeah, and after the fight, of course, there was major implications worldwide. I'm going to start off, I'm going to give you a quote from Langston Hughes. He was a major figure in the Harlem Renaissance, noted author, great writer. But he wrote that night that I walked down 7th Street and saw grown men weeping like children and women sitting in the curbs with their heads in their hands. All across the country, that night, when the news came that Joe was knocked out, people cried. Now, conversely, the German reaction, of course, was jubilant. Hitler contacted Schmeling's wife, sending her flowers and a message for the wonderful victory of your husband, our greatest German boxer. I must congratulate you with all your heart. And Schmeling dutifully reciprocated with nationalistic comments for the German press, telling a German reporter after the fight, "At this moment, I have to tell Germany, I have to report to the Fuhrer in particular, that the thoughts of all my countrymen were with me in this fight, that the Fuhrer and his faithful people were thinking of me. This thought gave me great strength to succeed in this fight. It gave me the courage and the endurance with this victory under German collars. So right there, I mean, that's not the quote I would think you would want to give if you're Max Schmeling, but I think that the political ramifications of this fight were huge, and then from then on, Schmeling was a legend in Germany, at least for the next couple years.
Well, he really was. He was actually he's extraordinary property from the 1920s. But you're right that maybe took it to even another level, beating the American and beating the Black American and such like that. And Langston Hughes is from the Harlem Renaissance and stuff. So it was America really came behind Joe Louis as a human being, as an American for the second fight. He was still, and Schmeling wasn't quite as unpopular. So the first fight had just a tiny bit of a racial ending. So, yeah, I think most Americans were still rooting for Joe Louis over Max Schmeling, but there was still a group of Americans who liked the white guy beating the black guy because it hadn't quite taken on the level of the Nazis versus the Allies yet, though it was going to. But Joe Louis was still very popular, but it hadn't quite reached that level yet. So America was still a little, some Americans were happy about the outcomes, a lot of Americans weren't, but you're right, Germany was pretty united in being happy about this outcome.
Yeah, and you look at it, the fight was supposed to be the winner gets a shot at the Cinderella Man, James J. Braddock, who had upset Max Baer in one of the greatest upsets in heavyweight title history. But Jacobs with Lewis has a different plan. He actually goes to Braddock, offers him a huge amount of money, but on top of that, he offered Braddock 10% of all Lewis purses for the next 10 years. Braddock couldn't turn it down, so Braddock, instead of defending against Schmeling, defends against Lewis. Lewis dominates Braddock, knocks him out in like the 7th or 8th round, and becomes the heavyweight champion.
Yeah, there's actually there's also even more of behind of what happened, because Schmeling was supposed to have the opportunity to fight Braddock, but I have heard that there's also people behind the scenes that were concerned that if Schmeling did defeat Braddock, well, then it would be in the hands of the Nazis, and then Hitler wouldn't let Schmeling fight and then just hold on to the title. And so yes, there was a push to put Lewis ahead of line and fight Braddock. And Braddock surprisingly knocked Lewis down in the first round, though it's not really that competitive a fight. And then when Lewis nails a one punch to knock out Braddock in the 8th, he flattens him.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the thing that I took away from that was the Cinderella Man was a tough son of a bitch, because he took a hellacious amount of shots in that fight.
He took a lot of shots and stuff, and I don't know, everyone makes the movie about whoever they want to make the movie about, but I was really surprised when you see Braddock as far as was he even worthy of being a person to fight for the heavyweight title. Obviously he beat Baer, but his record, was something like 3 wins and 11 losses before he came out with like 4 or 5 wins in a row to get the championship opportunity. He's a real weak heavyweight champion as far as when you said the 10 worst. He had to be in there, but maybe that's what made him the Cinderella Man.
Actually, I don't think he's in the 10 worst because I had him at number 11.
Okay. I'll buy that.
Let's see. So we get to the second fight. Now it's a little bit different. And the other thing is this. We want to talk about Hitler, the Nazis, and Schmeling. This is the thing that stood out to me, and this was an article I read about from the time. He met in, I believe it was New York in 1936, early 36, to talk to the U.S. Olympic Committee about about not boycotting the 36 games that were held in Germany. And he basically went in and he told those people that things were not as bad, we were having propaganda for our newspapers. They were lying to people about how bad Germany was. He gave them his word that it wasn't that bad there. And a couple days later, the U.S. Olympic Committee team, mainly because of what Schmeling told them, decided to send a team to the 36 Olympics.
Well, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you this, that one thing we agree on, I'm not sure whether Schmeling was ever a Nazi himself, but there's no doubt the Nazi Party was using him, and that he wasn't stupid about it. He knew that he was being used as a goodwill ambassador and a propaganda machine, and so in that sense, yes, he is helping the Nazis without question. Even if he's not personally a Nazi, he's being used by the Nazis, and he knows it.
Yeah, he was aiding and abetting.
Yeah, in his own way. Yeah, it's the truth. I mean,
well, see, I've never understood why everybody is so quick to defend him when he did so many things to help Hitler and the Nazis.
Well, I guess it's just because that, like I said, I've seen biographies and documentaries and stuff that had some Jewish businessmen who moved to America and gave stories, and I don't think they're going to tell these stories. He did try to do personal things.
Yeah, he helped
in his own way,
friends.
but
he helped his rich friends.
Well, they became rich, but but you're right. I'm not defending the fact that he was being used, and he knew he was being used. So, if nothing else, he could have, as you said, if he couldn't, he could have detached himself and said, I'm not a part of this, and this is a bad situation, and he didn't do that.
Yeah, and the thing is this. I mean, he had a quote that he said, if I remember right, I am a fighter, not a politician. I am no Superman in any way. So I don't think he was a Nazi. I just wish he would have done more.
I think you're right.
I wish he had done more.
I think that's exactly right. I think he really did just sort of view it that way. But, I guess the question is, and this is like with Humphrey Bogart with Casablanca, who's kind of acting like, I don't care, about this stuff, is there got to be a time in your life where you do got to be political? Is there a time in your life where you do got to stand up for something? You and I argued whether this war or that war was the right one or the wrong one, but we all agree that World War II was this was a big one, and this was Max Schmeling's test, and he probably failed the test. That this is a time where you maybe have to be more than an athlete because you're being used as more than an athlete.
Yeah, and I mean even Jack Dempsey, who was his friend at the time, legendary ex-champion, basically pleaded with him to defect and declare American citizenship.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but I would believe that. Though Dempsey got in much trouble with the public because he avoided World War I service for his career. Should he have joined World War I instead of worrying about heavyweight champion? I don't know. Every person has to make their own decisions. But,
well, hell, let's face it, Christopher. We've had 3 presidents in the last 2 decades that didn't feel like they should serve. So I'll forgive Jack Dempsey since other guys can be president. He should be able to be a heavyweight champion.
Right, and I agree. The only thing that with Schmeling is this isn't just avoiding this or that. There's a slaughter going on, a Holocaust going on. This is a really bad situation that still stands out in history. I can appreciate that sometimes some people just don't want to be political, but I guess the point of Casablanca is, hey, once in a while, even if it's not in your heart, you've got to make a statement because you're just pushed into a situation where you've got to make a statement. And Schmeling should have. I guess you're right. Maybe he should have done more. I guess I agree with that. Like I said, I don't think of myself as a defender of him, but he was being, and if nothing else, don't let yourself be used by the Nazi Party. If you just want to be an athlete, wiggle out of the Nazi Party and just be fighting in America and say, I'm not a part of any of this. But instead, he made things worse by being used by this party.
All right, real quick, before we get to the second fight, we're going to take a break. Hear a word from our sponsor, mybookie.ag. I'll be back with Christopher Shelton in a minute.
Hey everyone, my name is Alex Golden. I am the host of the Courtroom Podcast, an NBA debate show here at The Grueling Truth. And I'm here with one simple message. If you're watching the games, it's time to start making money. The Grueling Truth has partnered with mybookie.ag, an industry-leading sportsbook website who reminds you that where you bet is just as important as who you're betting on. And that's why The Grueling Truth urges you to check out mybookie.ag. In addition to the usual thousands of odds, money lines, proposition bets, and futures offered on mybookie.ag daily, they also have in-game live betting and a mobile site that makes wagering on the go easier than ever. So join now, and mybookie.ag will give you a 50% bonus on first deposit for up to $3,000 in extra playing money. Just enter promo code TGT50. That's TGT50 to take advantage of this offer. Visit mybookie.ag, courtesy of the Grueling Truth Network, and enjoy winning today. MyBookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid.
All right, guys, we are back on the Grueling Truth Sports Network with the Old Time Boxing Show. Myself, Christopher Shelton, talk a little Louis-Schmeling, 1 and 2. Also, by the way, Chris, there is a debate on whether America should have been in World War I anyway, so that's why I'll give Dempsey a pass.
Oh, okay. Well, I like Jack Dempsey. I was just throwing out the controversy he faced in his own time.
Well, all I know is this. I read a biography about Winston Churchill, and he actually, in that, said that if America would have minded their own business and stayed out of the World War and hadn't entered it, the Allies would have made peace with Germany in the spring of 1917. And had that peace been made, there would have been no collapse in Russia, followed by communism, no breakdown in Italy, followed by fascism, and Germany would have not signed the Versailles Treaty, which basically destroyed Germany and put them in the recession, depression they were in that made Hitler come to power. But I'm sure nobody here cares about that.
Well, I'm sure Winston Churchill forgave America when we came in and saved their asses from getting taken over by the Nazis.
Yeah, we
in
should
World
have
War
let
II.
that go. Hell, the Nazis might have been better than British. I'm kidding, and I know Bob Day's listening. It's the only reason I said that. He's our British correspondent. But we get to the second fight, Louis-Schmeling 2. I mean, the thing I saw is I remember reading at one point that over 70 million people in this country alone listened to this fight, which was over 50% of the population. The gross attendance was 72,000. The paid attendance was 66,000. It was $1 million gate. Lewis came in as a 3-1 betting favorite. So I think that this was kind of the same thing as 2 years before, where everybody was sure now that Schmeling was on the downside and Lewis's youth would be able to overcome him.
Yeah, and also Lewis this time around had sparring partners throwing overhand rights, so he was preparing for him. And ultimately, he didn't have to face him because this thing went pretty quick. But this time, he was ready. He wasn't going to play golf. He was really going to be prepared for this guy. And he was mad. He was mad at himself, and he said this is the only time I ever faced an opponent that I hated. He was just furious that this guy had knocked him out. And he was ready to go at him. And it's the one wonderful thing about this is because when I watch these fights, I keep reminding myself, because I just saw recently the movie 42 and Jackie Robinson and baseball being integrated in 1947. This is years before 1947, and America was rooting for the black guy over the white guy because of what had happened through the politics. So it's a very interesting dynamic in that sense too.
Yeah, and if you look at the fight, I mean, I think maybe Schmeling landed one punch. But the beginning of the end, I think, was the right hook, I think it was, that Lewis hit Schmeling in the body with. And it looks like Schmeling actually lets out a scream when he gets hit by that punch.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Schmeling did, and Tunney almost got himself knocked out completely with Dempsey too, is a stubbornness of not wanting to go down. Schmeling holds onto the ropes instead of going down initially, and so Lewis is just pounding away at him, wailing away at him, when Schmeling might have been better off just dropping to the ground after that first punch rather than just holding the ropes and trying to hang on.
Yeah, and
ended up taking a standing knockdown for the first one.
Yeah, and after the third knockdown, Schmeling's trainer tried to throw the towel in, which was something they did in Europe back then. Referee, the great Arthur Donovan, before he had a chance to pick up the count in unison with the knockdown timekeeper. Basically, you could see him throw the towel over the rope and returning to Schmeling's crumpled figure. But then Donovan took one look at him and signaled the end of the battle. And from everything I hear, the transmission, which was 3 o'clock in the morning in Germany, was abruptly cut off. And Harlem celebrated that night with the rest of America.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. That I know the transmission, as you said, would definitely be cut off once Schmeling's knocked out. I heard they were even doing it even seconds before that they realized he was getting battered around. I don't know if you'd really know for sure that he was going to get knocked out. But anyway, yeah, the German transmission went out because they didn't want people to know the truth. And America celebrated a wonderful thing. Whites and blacks celebrated this victory for America over the Nazi.
Yeah, and the thing that impressed me was from reading, I read a newspaper article from like the day or two after the fight where they were talking about the Harlem police actually blocked off 38 blocks so everybody could celebrate all night.
Yeah, I believe it. It was a Black America had to put a lot of their hopes into this one man, but all America, you're right. To Black Americans, he was more special, but he was a very special fighter. And anytime you're a heavyweight champion, you're elevated at a certain level. But there's certain heavyweights who rise to the top higher. John L. Sullivan, Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis. They have a greater degree of popularity. So this is a huge, high-profile victory for the heavyweight champion. Period. And this time, the American heavyweight champion. A lot of other countries, when you have a Mexican fighter, they're rooting for the Mexican guy. The Chilean fighter, they're rooting for the Chile guy. Americans usually don't root for somebody just because they're American, but in this case they did. This was the American fighter, and America was rooting for him, and he kicked his ass. Schmeling's out.
And the thing I remember, I read Max Schmeling's autobiography, and he himself confirmed a public reaction to the outcome, because he recounted in his autobiography his ambulance ride to the hospital afterwards, where he said that he drove through Harlem. There were noisy, dancing crowds. Bands had left the nightclub and bars, and they were playing, dancing on the sidewalks and streets. The whole area was filled with celebration, noise, and saxophones, continuously punctuated by the calling out of Joe Louis's name. So Schmeling had to go to the hospital. He wasn't in good shape after that fight. But the one thing that struck me was how they developed a friendship outside of the ring, which endured until Joe Louis's death in 1981. And, I mean, it was kind of like, you had racial overtones with Holmes Cooney. We talked about that last week. Now they're best friends. Now, Louis and Schmeling are two guys that if you'd have told us in 1937 or 38 they would they would grow old as friends, nobody would have believed it.
Well, I'll confirm and add to that is that even Schmeling knew before the fight, because as he walked into the ring, he said he was called Nazi and called a bunch of curse words, and people were throwing things at him. So he knew he was the unpopular guy. And then to confirm the sort of friendship and stuff, apparently in 1950, this is by Joe Louis's son that says this. Schmeling comes to America and reaches Louis while he's out on the golf course, and Joe Louis's son jokes that when I was born, my dad was out on the golf course, and when my sister was born, my dad was out on the golf course, and when Max Schmeling contacted my dad and he was on the golf course, Joe Louis left the golf course to meet with Max Schmeling. He didn't do it for us, but he did it for Max Schmeling, and Max Schmeling told him, I just wanted you to know that when we fought, I never had anything personally against you, and I just wanted you to know that I'm a fighter doing my job. And at that point, Joe Louis embraced him, and from that point on, 1950, which would have been just after Joe Louis had retired and then attempted his comeback against Ezra Charles. But anyway, from 1950, they remained friends until Louis's death.
Yeah, and he used to go visit Louis every year, from what I heard. So it's always good.
I'll just throw this out. Schmeling caught a break post-World. I mean, after he lost that fight, apparently the Nazis were so mad at him, they forced him to enlist and just as a regular soldier and stuff.
Yeah, he was a paratrooper.
Yeah, he paratrooped, but he hurt his back, and apparently he'd hurt the injuries from fighting Louis previously. So then he just spent the rest of the war in the hospital and stuff. So he became a pariah. He went from hero to pariah in that country. But meanwhile, after the war, Coca-Cola wanted to, they figured they have a good product, and obviously they do, and they wanted to reach Germany and reach Germans, and they thought Max Schmeling is the most, a huge ambassador in Germany, and they tried to and said, would he be the person that was the ambassador? And all he really has to do is promote the product, and he made him a fortune. And eventually, he started even taking over the organization and stuff in Germany, and he became a wealthy man.
All right, Christopher. I think we've got another show done. As always, it was a lot of fun. Hopefully, informative to people that listened.
Sure, I'll just add one more thing, because that without going too far into it, is that Joe Louis developed tax problems, and
that could be an entirely different show, Chris.
All right, then I'll just add this, that anyway, when Joe Louis died, he didn't have anything, and several people contributed to his funeral, and Max Schmeling was one of the people that contributed to his funeral. I think Frank Sinatra was another.
Yeah, I think Louis's last job was as a greeter in Vegas.
Yeah.
So sad how that ends up. Especially sad when you consider the government goes after an American hero that fight did a lot for the war effort also. Because at the time, the Germans were starting to roll through all these countries and look unbeatable.
I'll throw this out to you as a trivia question, and then we'll end this thing. Do you know where Joe Louis was the night before he died?
Where Joe Louis was the night before he died. Was that Holmes Burbick?
Yep, watching the Holmes Burbick fight. So, just thought that's a fun fact to throw out.
Yeah, because I think that fight was June 11th. He died June 12th, didn't he?
Yeah, he died the day after the fight.
Yeah. All right, Chris. Great show again. Next Monday, we'll be back live at 1 o'clock again. Keep an eye out. We may have a special announcement for a special show. No matter what show it is, it'll be special if me and Chris are doing it.
I hope so. Yeah, absolutely.
But everybody, make sure you go to thegruelingtruth.net. You can check out our interviews last week with Chuck Wepner, Alex Ramos. We'll have interviews posted this week with former champions Tony Lopez and Clarence Bones Adams. You can check out our NFL Pick'em show live tomorrow night at 10 o'clock on thegruelingtruth.net. Also, you can check out our college football pick'em show, which we did last night, breaking down the final 4 teams in college football with former Alabama National Championship offensive lineman Bill Searcy. You can catch all of our shows on iHeart, iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher. Anywhere you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Christopher Shelton, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.